What's up, everybody? This is BakaBites. I'm Frankfurter, and that over there is magically average.
There's
For
no
those of
elephant
you
in
who
the
are
room.
for those of you who are listening on audio, I just basically pointed my pinky, which is wrapped up, which looks like a spool of freaking yarn. I nearly cut about a quarter of it off. Nearly cut it off. I was using a mandolin for the very first time, and it went
And
just
last.
straight through. And
And
last,
last.
yes.
First and last.
And it cut straight through, and it was so sharp it went through part of the nail. So I've got 8
Yummy.
stitches in my pinky. We're still doing the show. It's fine. I'm fine. I will have these stitches removed next Monday. Hopefully, we'll see. But anyways, this is
Yeah, I
actually
was
a
like,
very great segue. Today we're talking about gore, specifically gore in anime, and just kind of being a little desensitized to it. So, friend of the show, we've always talked about him. We always bring his name in here, whether we drag it through the mud or we praise him. Good old Stead. Over the weekend, Solo Leveling's new episode was coming out, and he kind of gave us a heads up. He's like, just a warning for Solo Leveling, it's pretty gory this week. And that got us kind of thinking, like, what is too gory? What is too gory? Because you and I both watched this episode and we're like, oh, this is fine. This
Yeah.
is just another action anime show. This is just another episode.
Yep.
But like at what point do we kind of become desensitized to it to the point that yeah, this isn't gory, or I won't say gory enough, but this isn't anything to kind of bat your eyes out like at, because to me this was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think of like like back in I apparently this pinky is affecting my fucking brain. I can't form a sentence to save my soul. Um, but like thinking back, what was that moment of just like, okay, that's a lot of blood, and then you kind of rewatch and you're like, that's fine.
Oh, I don't know if I have a moment like that. It would probably be some episode of Bleach. Like my thinking back to my childhood, there's like one scene in Bleach that always scared me because for some reason it ended up always being the episode that I would randomly watch on Toonami.
Hmm.
And I think it was one where they sent out Soul Reapers to go fight off some hollows in the city, and the hollows ended up being a stronger, like, whatever power than what they had originally anticipated, and some of
Right.
the hollows like ate the Soul Reapers. And like it was the scenes where like they were like grabbing them and like munching them, or like grabbing them and like just chucking them. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. Yeah, my little brain could not comprehend what was going on. I was just more scared than anything. But going back now, I'm probably like, whatever. The first episode of Attack on Titan was scarring, so I don't think anything is going to beat that. But um, I will say, I think the one anime that has yet to, in my opinion, has yet to be beat in terms of gore, which is where a lot of my desensitization, I think, started, is Dead Man Wonderland. I could not have imagined the amount of violence, blood, just pure atrocities that show captured, like to the level that which they were able to get it past by by like the screeners, by whatever broadcasting station they were able to put it out through in Japan, whatever company used to finally distribute it on like Blu-ray, which is where I watched it. Um, it was grotesque, and I think that was sort of the moment where I'm like, well, I made it through. So much so that I watched it multiple times because I enjoyed it when I was originally watching it. But I think I made the determination in my brain, like, I don't think there's going to be anything in the foreseeable future that will come close to this. There's been a few. I think like Attack on Titan's one that stands out for most, probably. I'm
Yeah.
sure Chainsaw Man will get there as we progress through the rest of the initial arc into future arcs. Like there's
I
definitely
mean,
plenty of scenes.
I mean, for Chainsaw Man, I feel like we did have that moment with the Infinity Devil, in which he just is ravaging through just nonstop, and for 2 days or whatever it was before the Infinity Devil gave up. So I feel like we've already had one of those moments in the series because I can't. There's a couple scenes probably coming up in the coming seasons, but like I can't really think of anything that's bloodier than that in that
Yeah,
series.
well, so I guess the one piece that we can talk about too is I definitely it's a lot harder to watch, and maybe this is what Stead was getting at with his comment about the episode being gory, or
Hmm.
and very, just outwardly violent. I can differentiate in my brain, like I can, compartmentalize. Okay, this is animated fictional. It's monsters, it's demons, it's things that don't exist in our material world, right? Like we
Right.
we don't have to experience going outside and being ambushed by like a giant walking hollow, right? Or a titan just barreling through towns. We don't have to deal with that. Humans, on the other hand, that's a little bit more challenging to watch, even in anime. And I think that's where a lot of my, at least again for me, the desensitization comes in, and why Dead Man Wonderland was so hard, because the very first episode, I think, honestly, 2 minutes in, you see a
Mhm.
classroom get obliterated, and it's like unidentifiable carcasses in just a massacred classroom and one lone survivor. And that's the start of the anime. And you're like, okay, that's a very extreme tone to begin with. It can't get any worse, right? And then it fools you by depicting some of the most insane scenes ever. People getting like disintegrated in acid, like from foot to head. Like you see the entire progression of like this person got acid splattered on their leg. There's their bone. It snapped off. Their leg is behind. The rest of their body is slowly disintegrating, like into nothingness. Like just nasty, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of, again, for me, a lot of the desensitization comes in, because before it would have been like that'd be really hard to watch because it's humans. You can relate to some degree because they're not fictional beings in the sense of monsters or creatures that don't exist. They're at some level relatable because they are humans at the end of the day. Granted,
Yeah.
again, it's still fiction. It's still an anime, but you have that connection. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, kind of for me going back to it, really, I started seriously watching a ton of anime back in like 2015. But the I feel like going into it, I was already desensitized. Like I had watched so many movies growing up, especially a bunch of horror movies and a bunch of action movies that I feel, and war movies as well, like Saving Private Ryan, etc. That I
Mm,
feel like transitioning to cartoons or animation wasn't as big of a deal because it is just cartoons. It is just kind of zany sometimes. So to me, I really never had that transition of just like desensitized via anime. I feel like it was more so back when I was a teenager watching all these movies that I was like, okay, I'm a bit more desensitized to it. However, that's not to say I've had moments of just like, oh boy, like that's a
yeah.
lot. I have not watched Dead Man Wonderland in a very long time, so my memories of it are just very hazy. But as of recently, there are two shows that I watched that really, and by recently I mean within the last 2 years, outside of Chainsaw Man, there were two shows. They're both older that just had so much gore in it to the point where one of them was just funny and ridiculous type of gore,
Oh, I know
and
which
the
one.
other and the other was just like holy fucking shit, this is just too much. The funny one was Hellsing Ultimate.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, like if you don't know what that is, it's basically a vampire just taking on Nazis and just it basically just being a blood fest the entire time.
Hmm.
And it is a good show by all means. It is a great show actually. But it is way over the top with its blood and gore and just, kind of body parts kind of flying wherever. But it's more so, I feel like, a bit more comedic than anything else. But then you had a show like Blood Sea, which is technically within the horror genre, but it's not necessarily like scary. It's not like pop out scary. It is more along the lines of like a Saw type of scary, where it's just whenever something dies, there's just a lot of blood. But near the end of the show, bunch of monsters are on a rampage, and one of them is literally like a monster blender and takes like six people, puts it inside like the blender thing, and just blood just everywhere. And it's like, what the
I
fuck is
I
this?
I always see that clip and it always makes me laugh because they like scoop them up and they were just like, and they
Yeah,
just
it's just like, what the fuck did I just watch?
yeah
Like, so kind of one of those things of just like, there are moments still for me that just get to me that I'm like, oh, oh God, that's a whole lot of blood. But
yeah
at the same time, I think like watching a show like Solo Leveling, and watching a show like Chainsaw Man, granted, Chainsaw Man more so dealing with devils than Solo Leveling was this week with people.
hmm
I feel like that it wasn't as bad because I've already been so desensitized to it.
yeah. I think in a similar vein to a lot of the way that I can view anime too is based on the time period that it's set in.
Mm.
Similar to like with you in movies, like I growing up, I didn't watch a lot of like R-rated movies. I was more into cartoons just throughout most of my childhood. And then if I wasn't cartoons, it was sports. That was like really the only two. I wasn't a big like film person. If we went to movies, it was like Harry Potter or, whatever popular things coming out. But so I wasn't really exposed to a lot of like the like war movies or anything to that degree. But watching more of those nowadays and like anime that's set in specific time periods, I almost have more of like an appreciation, at least for how it's depicted, like the
Right.
brutality of the setting that it's in. If Saving Private Ryan is a very, very tough watch for obvious reasons. It's not supposed to be, going like jumping
Not
through
for kids.
daisies. No, right. It's supposed to depict a very brutal and horrifying time in the world. Um,
Yeah.
I say all that too to kind of set up an anime that I had watched recently, which is undoubtedly the most gory, violent anime that I've seen in quite some time, which is Blue Eye Samurai.
Still
Um,
need to watch it. It's on my short list.
it is, if you haven't watched it yet, it is on Netflix. It is an incredible watch. It's set in I can't remember exactly what time period it's in. I know it's in the Edo time period, so it is quite some time ago. We're talking like shogunate. We're talking the inclusion of like
It is
samurais
the Edo
and
period, 17th century.
yeah. So the Edo period is quite a long-ish period. But yeah, so the 1600s, right? During that time, feudal times, there is just rampant violence in towns. There's, limitation on what obviously you can
Security.
do. Yeah, yeah, to some degree. But like at the end of the day, like the way that the anime is played out, like they go to different towns and experience different like groups of people that are living in different areas around Japan, and like the main traveling group goes to a town and they show up and they're just like, all the townspeople are like, it's a duel, it's a duel. They're like, yes, let's go watch the duel. And they're like, okay. And my wife and I were watching it. We both loved it. And we're just like, okay. And yeah, they just are placing bets. Dude gets decapitated and you see people like throwing their bets on the ground. Like, God damn it. You weren't supposed to die, stupid. And they just leave his body there.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you were to watch an anime like that set in today's time period, that would be really really, really strange. And you're like, where's the police? Or, that person's going to prison. But back then it's just like, no, that was just, if you challenged someone to a duel and lost, you're dead. Sorry.
GG's.
Yeah. So, like, again, appreciating the time period, there are a number of scenes of battle sequences with just some of the most intense sword fighting, like limbs going everywhere, like
Yeah.
multiple people getting skewered at once. Like you see just full at the waistline severing of a human body, and then one part flying through the air and the other part still just kind of standing there. Like it's very intense. If you're not
Yeah.
prepared for it, it can catch you off guard.
Yeah. I like for me, I was scrolling through my mal as to what I've watched and thinking, okay, what way back when I started watching anime, what was that show that was like, oh, this is definitely not for kids? Because like Cowboy Bebop was one of those shows. I was like, cool, this is animation for adults. This isn't for children. It's a little
Mhm.
too highbrow, whatever. However, it wasn't until I watched Future Diary, aka Mirai Nikki, that I
Oh,
was like, "Oh, yeah, no, this is not a kid show at all. Like the anime can also be for adults.
yeah.
This is definitely not appropriate for kids. If you don't know Mirai Nikki or Future Diary, I would definitely look into it. It is definitely a bit darker, edgier, kind of, when you're a teenager in your emo phase. It's not a phase, I know, whatever. This was like a big show. This was a huge show, because it is kind of a little edgy like that because of how much blood it was using.
Mhm.
But it still holds up. Like I feel like there was a purpose to the blood rather than some of these shows now that they just like have just tons amounts of gore. But I don't know. I think I'm thinking back and just reminiscing about what I watched back, when I first started really re-watching anime, of like what was the shows that like kind of determined, oh, this is not for kids. This is adult animation.
Yeah.
And that one definitely stands on top of a lot of other shows. Um, but I'm also trying to think of what movie was it that kind of burned into my retinas of, oh, this is blood and gore. This is a gory movie.
Mhm.
And it kind of finally hit me, and I didn't even watch the entire movie because I was like, oh no, nope. It was Starship Troopers. I watched part of
Oh.
Starship Troopers, which by all intents and purposes is like a comedy parody of like war movies.
Mhm.
But it's got a fuck ton of blood, it's got a fuck ton of limbs flying everywhere, and it's got a bunch of fucking bug guts and bug blood, and it's just very off-putting for a 7-year-old.
I'm sorry, what?
7, 8-year-old, somewhere in that range, yeah. So,
There's not a 1 in front of that number, it's just a
no.
singular digit?
I would have to go back and see when that movie actually released, but it was like shortly after it came to DVD is when I
Bro,
watched that movie, or part of that movie, at a
I
friend's house, and I was just like, "Nope, not for me."
I was shitting my pants at The Brave Little Toaster because of the one scene with, like, the
I mean, that
fucking
that movie's just emotionally
AC.
scarring.
Yeah, like, that was scary to me, and meanwhile, you're watching, like, Starship Troopers? Good God.
Yeah, it came out in '97, so I can only imagine I was probably, I mean, born in '92, so that's probably 8 years old. Yeah, 7, 8 years old, somewhere in that
I
time
I
range.
will say I had a similar one. It wasn't gory. I have, I feel like still to this day, a very like overactive imagination to things. And I was at a buddy's house and his dad was watching When Mars Attacks, which is a goofy ass movie, right? So goofy, so dumb. But
I have not watched that movie in forever, but I fucking love it. It
I
is a
walked into the
great,
room
awful movie.
I walked into the room when they land, like the aliens land, and one of the like soldiers is like, America, and they just zap him and he turns into a skeleton and like basically sets off the entire war.
Yep.
And that traumatized me for a long time. I was like, there are things in this world that can just turn you from a person directly into a skeleton. Oh my God. Like absolutely fucking traumatized. But yeah, again, with the blood and gore too, I think for me, I'm very judgy now. Again, going back to the whole desensitization too, there hasn't really been anything that has like steered me away because of it, or caused me to, just completely stop watching for one reason or another. Like if I'm just like, oh my God, I can't handle it. The
Right.
one thing I will say though that can get me to stop or at least not appreciate something as much is if kind of what you were alluding to earlier, if it's unnecessary or completely like obtuse with how much it's being used, right? Like they're just turning human beings into like the what is it, the Venetian fountain in Las Vegas. Like people are
Yeah.
just turning into like Niagara Falls when they get like their limbs chopped off, and you're just like, okay, little too much. Or over the top things. Like I've never watched through Blood Sea. That's what it's called, right? Blood Sea. What
I
about the
think
goofy
so.
one? Yeah, like something like that. I just wouldn't watch because it's not. It wouldn't be entertaining. It's using gore as its primary driver with no substance behind it, which is not to me very like entertaining. Um, I
Yeah. Like I understand though, like occasionally I will understand if like a show does like the Akira Kurosawa type of blood splatter type thing. Like I understand that that's like an homage, but if you
yeah,
do it over and over and over and over again, it's like okay,
right. The
unless this is really like adding something to the show, then this is just unnecessary.
yeah, I will say, kind of flipping the script a bit. Um, there have been a number of different like Reddit threads and like Twitter threads that I've read that I've kind of scrolled through that do side by side comparisons of like an anime coming out and it's the manga to do a like to show you
Right.
like here's actually somewhat of the censorship that was adapted to when it came out as an anime.
I
The
assume
main the main
are
one
you
is
referring to JJK season 2?
um
Because
no part of
I feel like that show is kind of like our generation's Attack on Titan. Like that show went from being like, this is like fun, friendly, we're all on an adventure, let's go eat some fingers, and then it's just like bloodbath. It's
yeah.
just battle after battle, bloodbath, explosions. It's just like what the fuck?
I want to point out a quick correction in that at no point was Attack on Titan happy go lucky. No,
No,
yeah.
this okay.
Until
True, true,
season
true.
4 when they went camping 3 times and ate pie. Um,
God damn it. But
but
yeah,
no,
no, I that's what I meant though, is just like
yeah. The, I think how do I want to put this? I think stepping into the room when like for the team that's directing or writing the anime, um, taking the adaptation from the manga, if I could put myself into that room, the reasoning I would place behind adding censorship to certain scenes is, I guess, to some degree, what you were trying to get at, which is this anime is going to be popular. This anime is going to kind of drive the community for a long time. We can't have it become something that's polarizing with overly grotesque scenes or like unnecessarily gory depictions that could dissuade people from watching. Basically, we just need to play it a bit safer.
that
Um,
and like, hey, we want to actually air this on TV or whatever.
right.
We want a better rating or a better time slot. We'll have to put it.
Yeah.
We'll have to kind of censor a little
That
bit.
that's my only reasoning behind it because the one I read through is for Attack on Titan, which um I have not read. I don't ever plan on reading it for many reasons. Um but enjoyed the anime for the most part, was not good at the end and just kind of was okay.
Right.
uh but I can appreciate the effort that was put into whoever made this thread doing the comparison, and reading through it, kind of getting this realization of like, okay, they most certainly avoided the pitfalls of making something too gory, because there are many scenes that if they were to do a 1-for-1 would be very hard to watch.
It would just be at that point like gore porn or something
It,
like that.
yeah, it'd be a challenge, right? Like Dead Man Wonderland could do it because I think they were just like, no, we want it to be at that level. Like we're not gonna be the next Bleach or One Piece. We're not gonna be the next like star of this era of anime. Like we're aiming to capture a portion of the anime fandom that is not afraid to see scenes like this, to see someone fall into a pit of spikes and, you know, quite literally see their guts like everywhere, right? You're not going to be afraid to see someone's eyes pop out of their skull and go into something. Okay? Like, we don't care. Attack on Titan, because of the level of popularity, and I think because they just did not want to push away a portion of the anime community that just could not handle it, went, we need to be careful with how we do some of these scenes. I wish I could remember one. I think the scene that stands out the most is they find one of their, it is the scene when I think Annie is going through the town in season 1. Sorry, spoilers if you don't know. It's the female Titan, whatever. And one of the scouts is like trying to get their fellow scout to like get up and like run basically, but they're already dead. Like you can see like from their face, you know, and the discoloration, like they're already dead. But you don't see like their lower half. In the manga, I believe their lower half is gone, and it's basically like their entrails are out. That would be a tough one.
Like darkened and whatnot.
Right. It's exactly a lot of what they did going through the thread. A lot of what they were able to do, you know, they were still able to capture obviously the intensity of these panels in the anime, but they definitely used heavy like shading or like blacking out of certain portions to basically just indicate like, FYI, this is like, it's gone, right? It's not there. Something like that in season 1, I could definitely see people reacting very strongly to, whether it's like oh my gosh, yes, it's only getting more intense, it's only getting better, great, to the people that are like, that was unnecessary and quite frankly over the top. Like, I'm not going to be watching that. And I'm sure they wanted to avoid both and just went, hey, let's make it, you know, let's make it gory, but let's sort of temper it so that we're not going to be polarizing the anime fandom. We're going to keep it, you know, right kind of in the middle. Another scene is when the female Titan's running through and basically just wipes out Levi's squad. There's a couple of ways that they get killed, all brutal. Like even in the anime, it was still hard to watch.
Doesn't she like take their strings and basically just like smack them into the ground and whatnot?
Well, she kind of kicks one and it snaps their head back. Another one, she like, I think another one she like, swats to some degree and they just kind of go flying. And then she's spinning two of them or one of them on their things like a fucking yo-yo. Like those three, or I can't remember how, I think it was three of them. Kills were just horrendous, like horrific to look at in the manga. So I think that there is some level of censorship, obviously, that for certain shows. Yeah, I think honestly Chainsaw Man is the one that came out and was just about as bloody and gory as what the manga was like.
And I think that I mean, to our initial conversation, Solo Leveling is pretty faithful as well. It's been a little over a year since I read the material, but it's pretty much the same in that as well.
Yeah.
But is there a show that's like, other than maybe like a Chainsaw Man or Solo Leveling, that is rather brutal or bloody, that is like airing now or kind of semi recent, that you would recommend because it is such a good show despite all of the gore?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I have one off
Um,
the top of my noggin if you want to think about it.
I have one, but it's just because I watched it recently. But go ahead. Let me ponder this for a second.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the show that's always slept on, unfortunately, and that is Made in Abyss. Made in Abyss is one of those shows that everybody knows about, they acknowledge, they know it's probably very good, but they're not going to watch it for one reason or another. I still highly, highly, highly suggest the show, despite the fact that it is rather depressing. But it is very, very, very good. It is probably one of the best shows out there since Freerun came out. It probably had the best world building in a show, in my opinion. I think Freerun's doing a phenomenal job and is probably it's outclassing it in some certain ways for
Hmm.
world building. But to me, the world building in Made in Abyss makes the show just 100 times better. But the characters are great, the dialogue is well written, the plot is great. I guess, yeah, that kind of ties all into all the encompassing.
Yeah.
Everything about this show is very good. However, it is very brutal. There are scenes where people die, and the ways they die are not fantastic. They are not great. They are very brutal, and then some of them are a little bit off screen, and then they are this like atrocious monster thing now, and that in itself is also brutal of just kind of having that imagination of like how they actually ended up this way.
Yeah.
And I'm basically really just pointing out the movie that connects seasons 1 and 2. That movie, there's one specific character that is just tragic, and it hurts, man. It just hurts to watch and just know. But I would think that, like, if I were to suggest a show that is bloody but also phenomenal, like in a good sense, outside of maybe Chainsaw Man and Solo Leveling, Made in Abyss definitely, and it's also just in general a slept-on show. I really wish more people would watch it because it is fantastic.
Yeah. The only I can think of three. All kind of have different, um, we'll say, purposes to the gore behind it. The main one, the one that came immediately to mind that is fairly recent, is Hell's Paradise. Another one that's time period sensitive. Um, there are a lot of scenes in the first initial, probably 3 episodes, that are incredibly brutal and intense.
Yeah.
Basically, I think his main character's name is Gobimaru. Uh, he just kind of, for lack of,
Gambi Maru.
yeah, for lack of a better way of describing him, he basically just eats through people.
He can.
He's got pure raw strength to the point where he could punch holes through giant grown ass people. And they don't shy away from that. There's a whole sequence, I think, in the second episode of basically just a pit fight of all these criminals. And it's like the strongest to survive, and he just takes probably 5 of them on at once in the ocean. And you don't think that the ocean could turn red because it's so vast. He got pretty close to doing that, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one. But again, it kind of is in the same similar vein to Blue Eye Samurai, in which it's time period based. To some degree, it's very like loose in that. I guess they talk about a shogunate, and you see them, and it is depicted in a way that you could tell it's somewhat, either Edo period or sometime just after that.
In the
So
time of samurai.
yes, so corporal punishment was basically just beheading. So yeah, again, it fits, so you can understand it. Um, another one that comes to mind, but it's really, it's only like the most recent season, because the first 3 didn't have this level of gore and brutality
You
to
about
it.
to say what I think you're about to say?
Yeah, Don Machi.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's only season 4. Like seasons 1 through 3 were pretty like,
Tame.
yeah, I mean, there wasn't really
There are
much.
moments, but yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah, there just season 4 was the
The
very,
ramp.
it was very eye-opening in that I wasn't expecting it. There really wasn't like any lead up to it. It was just kind of bam, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, we're here now. All right, awesome, cool. Like dungeon crawling, it's kind of that. It's that finality sequence of like, they finally reached this level of the dungeon. Cool. Like we were just in daycare up till this point, apparently. Like now we are in it. Sweet.
We're in the lower floors now, baby.
Yeah. And then the last one was that came to mind too was Wonder Egg Priority.
Yeah.
That one, it's more just the creativity behind it. I like how it was very bloody. It was very gory. There was a lot of intense moments, but, and I don't want to give away too much to it because I think this is a great anime to go in like absolutely blind. The way that they were able to imagine different battle sequences and different like events and how they transpired was very intriguing, and then couple that with a sensible amount of gore just kind of added to it, I think.
Yeah.
Like there was this, you had feelings of like, oh, this is just happy fun time, to immediate transitions of like, oh, this shit's real. Like you got to get out alive. Yeah. So I think that balancing act that it was playing on its viewers fit really well with the amount of like brutality in it too.
Yeah.
Not to mention the other aspect that they bring up later, which we're not going to talk about, but
Right. And I will say there's one last thing that I actually just thought of. I was like, is there anything that's really affected me recently that I'm just like, oh boy. And there was. It was a combination of blood and other things that I will not mention on this podcast, but I have recently within the last year read through most of Berserk. And if you
aha,
don't know what happens in volume 13 of Berserk, it is pain. I think it's 13 or 15. It is
I think it's
just
13.
pain. It was one of the most difficult things for me to read through. Looking at all the photos, it is one of those series that is just brutal, not necessarily for brutal sake, but to like it is over the top violence and gore, but also kind of it works for it. It works for it for the fact that you are dealing with medieval weapons of like giant ass swords and cannons, etc. So I think that I mean if you're in that time period that it's fine using that type of depiction, but anywhere else it's a little off unless you do it really well. But Berserk is definitely one of those that like it is not for the faint of heart, like at all. Whether it be blood or otherwise,
Yeah.
because there is a lot in that series that is not you think to yourself, someone had to think of this. Someone had to put ink on paper for this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fucked. So, but any closing statements?
Um, not really a closing statement, just more of like an appreciation for where we're at in anime. Because honestly, I maybe again, maybe I am desensitized, maybe I'm in a minority group. I like the kind of bounds that anime has been pushing in terms of like multiple areas, right? Like a lot of it's just like societal things, like showing different groups of people that were not typically shown before in anime, to the level of brutality and gore. Like there's a lot of areas in which anime is kind of unraveling into, and it's nice to see. And I'm glad that they're not shying away from a lot of this, a lot of the series that could potentially be cast aside due to its like level of violence and is just overly combative or grotesque nature to it, whatever you might depict it as. Like people probably, you know, if you went 10 years back, people would probably hear the name Chainsaw Man and go, no, abso-fucking-lutely not. And it could have been like immediately dead in the water. But thankfully, it's coming in at a time where people, you know, a lot of anime watchers had already seen Attack on Titan, had already seen, I didn't even bring this up, and I hate bringing it up, but like Devilman Crybaby, a lot of like other very impactful, intense anime, and are kind of like, at this point, honestly, they're just kind of asking for more. They're like, yeah, more, bring it on. Fire Punch, sure, let's see that depressing ass shit too. Can't wait.
I wonder if that's ever going to get
Well,
an animation.
they're doing the Look Back movie. In case you want to timestamp this episode, it's literally came out this today. Yeah. Well, I was gonna say this morning, but technically it's the next day in Japan, so believe it officially was announced on Wednesday. But yeah, I mean they're doing Look Back, one of Tatsuki Fujimoto's one shots. So who's to say it could get a Fire Punch? You know.
I don't know why I did this to myself. I decided you were like, 10 years ago, people would be like, Chainsaw Man? No, it's like, what was airing 10 years ago?
Stop making yourself sad.
Winter 2020 or 2014, there were like a few shows that are like, oh, these are good or whatever. Like the biggest note is probably Noragami, but also Space Dandy.
Yeah.
But then you go to spring 2014, you're like, oh, okay.
This
No
is 10
Game,
years
No Life.
old.
IQ Season 1, JoJo Part 3, and you're like,
Part 3 came out 10 years. Well, yeah, it's actually way older than that as the manga, but God.
Yeah. The manga is way older, but I mean the animation. It's like Part 3. You're like, oh Jesus, this is
my
10
heart.
years ago. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Then,
Stone Ocean ended like what last year, right?
Yeah, not last December, but the December before, so December 2022.
Yeah.
But then like you go to summer 2014, and I guess it's like, okay, after this maybe you can get a Chainsaw Man because you had Tokyo Ghoul, a Kamega Kill, and whatnot. So
yeah,
I feel like maybe
definitely the emo edgelords were like thriving during that season.
After summer 2014, you could make a case for Chainsaw Man, but before that, maybe not.
Maybe.
But yeah, thank you for making our case, or for watching us. We greatly appreciate it. Hopefully, we made a case for you to come back.
Yeah,
we really hope so, because left to our own devices, we are just a bunch of knuckleheads.
Left to our own devices, we chop our fingers off.
It was an accident, okay? I didn't try to actively.
My wife in the background just goes, too soon.
But we will be back next week with a brand new episode. If you want more short form content, go follow us on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. TikTok, we are at Baka&Co News, and on YouTube, we are at Baka&Co Podcast. So until next time, Spark Triumph. We'll see you then.